Today, in current events from a Christian perspective, MSNBC host says Christians not wanting to murder babies is like enforcing Sharia law. That's a crazy claim, but we'll investigate that. A Twitter user trolls the leftist LGBTQAI hashtag plus plus squiggly emoji teacher cult, and it is incredible. I think you're going to love it. We look deeper into this Dylan Mulvaney Bud Light fiasco, and I'm going to say a few things that I haven't heard many other people saying about it, and I think it's important for us to understand current events from a Christian perspective. Why does this matter, and what can we do about it? And then finally, AI, artificial intelligence news, is here. Artificial intelligence news. So instead of me being a talking head and a human being, you have the AI telling you what the news is. But what does this mean for Christians or creative people or just people in general? We'll look at all of this and more in current events from a Christian perspective. I'm Matt Odegaard, and this is Church Public. Welcome back to Church Public. As always, I'm Matt Odegaard, your host. Really appreciate you stopping by today. Got a lot to talk about, but before we get there, we have if you have subscribed, I really appreciate it. I love it. If this is interesting to you, important to you, go ahead and hit the like, subscribe, share, all of the buttons. You got it. If this helps, I just want you to share this with somebody. Share it with one person, one of your friends, and you're thinking about this like, I don't know how to deal with this. I don't want to spend the time researching this. I want to help you with that. That's what I'm here to do. Help you research some of these things that you don't have time to figure out on your own. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to always come back to the Bible. I'm going to always try to bring these as current events from a Christian perspective because that's the way I'm coming from. I have heard a lot of people talking about Republican style news or conservative style news, but both of those things, or neither of those things, depending on how you look at it, are necessarily Christian. So I'm going to come at it from the Christian perspective, regardless of party, though it does tend to be more conservative because we want to conserve things. I believe the traditions of the past, based on the Bible, are the things that are important and time tested, and the things that we need to lean into, rather than this progressive idea that if you keep going a certain way, that history is in your favor and eventually you're going to hit utopia because that's just how history goes. Ooh, that is not a biblical concept, let me just tell you, and I don't think we're going to get where you think we're going to go. So all of that to say, if you want to see some of the pictures, some of the videos from today, and you are just listening, I really appreciate you, listener, but you can go to churchpublic.com, check out some of that there, or you can also go and check out probably YouTube. I think we'll be there for this one. I really never know what's going to happen there, but I'll post it there and then go from there and see what happens. Okay, let's get to some news. All right. First story that we have is a story that I came across, a video that I came across, kind of an obscure video, but an MSNBC host who talks about this whole abortion dynamic. And the reality is this abortion, this, if you use the euphemisms, women's right to choose, or women's health care, or whatever new euphemism the left comes up with, this idea of abortion as healthcare, this idea of removing a baby forcibly from a mother in utero, in the womb, this is an issue that a lot of people are lining up to, both sides. And there really is not a lot of middle here. You're either for abortion or you're for saving lives. And this host is talking with another host, Ali Velshi and Dean Obadallah, and they're talking about the problems with Christians pursuing this idea that women don't get to choose, right? So that's the premise that we're coming into. I'll just play a quick clip for you in a moment. But the clip here is about the idea that Christians telling anybody that you don't get to choose, that's like enforcing their law upon you, just like Muslim Sharia law. So we'll talk more about Sharia law in a second, but let's start with this video clip. Here we go.
They pass anti-Sharia legislation in states.
There's no Sharia. There's no Sharia in America.
But they were always plotting this. Yeah. They were always about projection, and now they're doing it. So the fact that they caused, hate directed against our community, I think I take it more personally. So
it's Sharia, right? If you believe that you don't want people to have abortion rights, but you live in America, which constitutionally says that you can't impose a state religious belief on everybody else, but you do it, that's actually Sharia. That's actually what everybody else is complaining about what Sharia is. You've taken the good book and you have made that the law book.
So again, this is Ali Velshidin Obadella, who are saying people trying to save babies by not letting other people murder them in the womb is like Sharia law. So again, Sharia law, I'll just go through a couple things. If you don't know what Sharia law is, again, Sharia law is a Muslim law, a law from the nation of Islam, from the Quran and some of their other writings. And I just wrote down a couple of examples of Sharia law, current examples. Like if you went to Afghanistan today, these are examples. And as we'll talk about in a moment, and I talked about yesterday, maybe if you go to Minneapolis, Minnesota, in America, you may come across some of these same things. I know you say that's ridiculous. We'll get to that. But here are just some of the Sharia law examples. Conversion from Islam. The consequence is death. Defaming Islam, consequence, death. Drinking alcohol, consequence, 40 lashes, which is way worse than it sounds. Let's just say I believe, oh man, I should have looked this up, but usually they would whip people 40 lashes minus 1 if they wanted to keep them alive, because 40 lashes is really, really, really bad. If you steal something, possibly lose a hand or another appendage, maybe just a finger if it's just a little thing, but hand if it's a bad thing. If you're caught in adultery, if you're a woman, stoning, possibly to death, probably to death. If you are a man, you can force a woman, or I guess I can't even say a woman, you can force a girl to marry you as young as 9 years old. And of course, if you're a man, you can have up to 4 wives, but women only can have 1 husband. Anyway, there are so many of these things, but following the idea that you shouldn't murder innocent people, especially babies, this is both a Christian value and I would say just a Western value in general, except for in crazy America and now the Western countries that say just kill babies up until and maybe after the point of birth. If you have this idea that you shouldn't murder innocent people and innocent babies, that is, according to these two, the same as Sharia law, some of the things that we heard earlier. Not to mention, and I, again, shouldn't have to say these things out loud, but I will, that this country, America, was literally founded on the 10 Commandments, which are in the Bible, in case you missed that. And the book of Deuteronomy is the most quoted book in the founding documents. I know it's not John Locke. It's not, there are a lot of other people and philosophers that talked about laws and the idea of law, the philosophy of law, but Deuteronomy, the book of the Bible, is quoted more than any of those other ones. But sure, yeah, according to these two, protecting babies is just like the Nation of Islam stoning and amputating people for denying Allah and maybe stealing bread. Oh, these people. By the way, okay, and this is what I want to get to, because I did talk about this the other day, but we got to talk about it again, that the city of Minneapolis, again, this is Minneapolis, Minnesota, will now allow Muslims to broadcast their prayers in Arabic up to 5 times a day, as loud as they want. This isn't like you get what's the Sky Radio, satellite radio. Sorry, I don't have any of these newfangled devices. I have the old school turning radio. Anyway, it's not that. That's all I'm saying. It's not even radio broadcast. This is, you have a really big loudspeaker and you are playing these prayers in Arabic, they're Muslim prayers, up to 5 times a day with no restrictions. Actually, I think there's one restriction. It's like only up until 11 p.m., but it is as early as 3 a.m. So from, 11:05 till 2:55, you get a little break. Other than that, any time of day, Muslim prayers. And I mean, virtually, this is creating an informal Islamic city in the middle of Minnesota. Like, I don't know what else to say. I mean, that's what it's doing, right? Like, I said this the other day when we talked about this first, but if you did this with, for instance, me saying the Lord's Prayer, or let's get better than me, James Earl Jones reading the Lord's Prayer, 5 times a day, like that could ever happen in a city in America right now. But it should. It'd be great. I would be in favor of that, but that's not going to happen, right? So that'd be the same thing, and they would say, "Oh, that's Christianizing, Christian nationalism. You can't do that." But apparently, praying in Arabic, Muslim prayers, just like they do in Afghanistan, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that's just fine. Anyway, speaking of converting people, let's just move on from this. This is. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I love a good troll as much as anybody. And so this is maybe one of the best trolls I've ever seen, which is saying a lot. and I'll set the stage like this. I'm not gonna put all of these on the screen because there's a bunch of them. I'll read through it here in a moment. But you know how. And I've talked about this a bunch. So hopefully if you've been listening, if you've been following, if you haven't, go to churchpublic.com, listen to all the archives. There, I mean, what am I on? This is episode 312. So you got plenty to listen to if you want to. But you know how there's all these teachers across the country who've been crying. I mean, crying, wailing, gnashing their teeth about the absolute need to tell their students about their own gender or the gender the student thinks they are, or the teacher's relationship to other people. I mean, we're talking sexual relationships, right? LGBTQ, AAIP, hashtag ++ $, squiggly emoji. Like, they want to tell everyone, especially students, especially children, about this. And there are even schools that I've talked about that have gender closets, or they have different names for these, but this closet, basically, that the student can go to school, change in this closet into the clothes of their preference at school, and then change out of them at the end of the day and not tell the parents at all, because parents are bad and parents don't really know what's good for the kids, right? But these sophisticated, enlightened teachers know way better than you do what's good for your own kids. You know, or you also have those people who are saying we must have drag queen story hour in the library and drag queen shows for children because the children need to know who they are and change their gender and their preference and maybe be baptized in the LGBT cult by taking cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers and getting surgery. Well, all of that is happening. Again, if you don't believe me and if you haven't listened to any of this, this is all actually happening in America. But this Twitter user, sorry, I'm already laughing, but this Twitter user is kind of incredible. So they just switched all of this around, and I think the result is pretty amazing. So this Twitter username is Carpe Donctum. And here's just the first one. I'll read the first one, then I'll take this off and I'll read the rest for you. But the first one is this. As a third grade teacher, I often talk to my students about Jesus. They're so excited to hear about my faith. They point to the cross on the wall and ask me about the resurrection. Some have even gotten baptized in the sink. As long as they don't tell their parents, it's our secret. Now, okay, I hate to spoil the joke here, people, but this is a joke and it's not really happening, because this could never really happen in schools, because you know what public schools are like. Okay, I mean, again, I hate to spoil the joke, but not a real joke. So I'm going to read some of the rest of these because they are, I just think, amazing. All right, so he goes on. Sorry, I'm getting to the end of this here. So it says, guys, it's important we keep these tweets away from people who would get me fired. Please be very cautious who you share these with. Don't post links like this to prominent liberals. It puts my whole class in danger. And he goes on to say, I want you to understand something. I'm not grooming these young apostles. They come to me and I follow their questions back. These kids feel something is not right inside them, and I help them to understand that Jesus is what they're missing in their life. Guys, it's important we keep these tweets away from people who would get me fired. Please be very cautious who you share these with. Don't post links like this to prominent liberals. It puts my whole class in danger. Again, at the beginning of every year, I give each student a gospel of their own to read at school. For some of these kids, I was the first person they came out to as Christian. Even their parents don't know. A few of my students take communion here because their parents don't allow it. I'll just a little bit more here. It just keeps going. I had no idea so many people would be angry about me teaching third graders about their spiritual identity and encouraging them to get a sect change. It boggles the mind. Now I'm going to pause there in case you missed that. SECT, sect change. Like, that is the different sects of religions, right? From, whatever, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, blah, 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 non-denom, like, okay, that's a funny pun right there. All right. This is, so that was the troll, which is, to me, exactly the opposite. I mean, literally exactly the opposite of what some of these leftist ideologues in the LGBTQAIP hashtag ++ $ squiggly emoji cult have been doing to children. They've been promoting sex changes at the extreme end with hormone therapy and surgeries on the more extreme end. And if nothing else, like promoting, identifying as different members of the community and pointing to the flag in school. I played for you several months ago now at this point, kids pledging their allegiance to the pride flag in a classroom. These things are actually happening. But then this person makes the joke about the fact that instead of this, they're just talking about Jesus, they're talking about the Bible, they're pledging their allegiance to God, they're getting baptized. And of course, then this Twitter user is part of the joke is you don't tell the parents, because that is not the joke, but that is the reality that this leftist cult is telling your children. You don't have to tell your parents about this because they don't understand anyway. And of course, people went crazy. There's a bunch of responses here. I'm not going to read all the responses. Here's a couple. This is extremely unconstitutional. This is a violation of their rights. That you need to keep it a secret means you know it's wrong. You need to be fired. Well, okay. I mean, and I'm not condoning secret evangelism to people's children, but this is what they are doing to our children and saying it out loud. I played for you a couple of months ago. Again, this lady who said, I am a teacher and I have a master's degree and I know better than these silly parents. These parents don't know anything, so I should just be able to do whatever I want and not tell the parents about it. That's paraphrasing, but pretty close to exactly what she said. And I have clip after clip after clip of that. And yet when we joke about this, they're like, oh no, you can't do that. And people say he should be arrested for child abuse. I'm just going to skip a bunch of this because the responses go on and on and on and on and on. Here's where it gets, and it went really fast. I hope this is a response to this tweet thread. I hope you're well armed and I hope your address isn't listed in any public records. So let's just pause there and say for a minute. So one, we're having a joke. And two, the joke is about the Christian idea, Christian culture, Christian ethos that has been the foundation of Western civilization for hundreds of years at this point, now gets you death threats. That's what we need to point out here. We need to point out that the response to this joke about telling children about Jesus is death threats to you. Death threats to this Twitter user. And I don't know what's actually happened. They may have actually gotten death threats. I mean, this is a legitimate death threat to them. I hope you're well armed and your address isn't listed in any public record. This is the response. This is the response of the left is you cannot say these things and you should be removed for that. Right. And let's just say it this way. This is a good reminder for us Christians that 2,000 years of Christian history has shown that government after government after government, state after state after state, has tried to make being a Christian illegal. They just have. And sharing the gospel illegal. But Christians have laid down lives, many martyrs over the years to say that our first allegiance as a Christian, as a believer, as a follower of Jesus, as a child of God, is to God, to his kingdom, not the kingdom of this world. Romans 13, yes, we need to obey the authorities of the world when they are in line with God's kingdom, God's truth. When they are not, we're actually called to do the opposite. We're actually called to say, no, we cannot follow you down this path that is away from God. We must follow God. This also should really illustrate for you that this LGBT idea really is a cult. This is the exact inverse of what they do. Literally what they do, they treat everything like it is a religion. They hide it from parents. They say parents are the problem. I want to read. Yeah, I want to read this. I want to read this for you. This is a good place to read this. So I love this. And this is a good reminder, again, going back to the Bible, going back to the way the New Testament apostles, disciples dealt with this. Like, we just need to continually come back to this and remember this is the way it was and this is the way it is. Not that much has really changed. So this is Acts. Acts comes after Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels, the story of Jesus written by the disciples. This is Acts written by Luke, right? So it could have been Luke Acts as one thing, or Luke Part 2 if you want, though he called it Acts. Actually, anyway, that's a long story. We don't need to get into that. But That's what happens here. Acts is the early church after Jesus ascends, and what do we do? So this is Acts 4. Peter, remember Peter, the rock, Peter who denied Jesus but then was restored, and John, who calls himself the beloved disciple, which is really funny. They're hanging out and teaching and preaching about Jesus and resurrection. So Acts chapter 4. Peter and John are called before the Jewish leaders because they're preaching Jesus, and the Jewish leaders who crucified Jesus still are not super happy with people talking about Christ. This is chapter 4, verse 1. The priests and the captain of the temple guard and the Sadducees came up to Peter and John while they were speaking to people. They, these religious leaders, were greatly disturbed because the apostles, Peter and John, were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection of the dead, right? So they're saying, when you have life in Jesus, you live eternally with God. So verse 3, they seized Peter and John, and because it was evening, they put him in jail until the next day. I'm going to skip forward. You should go and read this. It's a really good chapter, but I'm going to skip forward to verse 17. But to stop this thing from spreading any further, in other words, this is the Jewish leaders saying, we need to stop this Christianity from spreading, right? But to stop this thing from spreading any further among the people, we must warn these men to speak no longer to anyone in this name, that is the name of Jesus. They, the religious leaders, called them in again and commanded them, Peter and John, not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. So Peter and John reply, love this, pay attention to this, here we go. Peter and John reply, judge for yourselves whether it is right in God's sight to obey you rather than God. We cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard. In other words, religious leaders, you can say, is it better for me to agree and follow you, religious leader, who crucified Jesus, by the way, or is it better for us to follow God? You're going to have to make a decision on that, but I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to follow God because I think he has more authority than you do, right? That's the direction that we're going. And this is the thing where you go, well, okay. You know, that was 2,000 years ago, 1970 years ago, whatever. And you go, well, you know, that's different than today. That's different than today. So we were talking about this, right? The response. I talked about this the other day, California and now Washington State. I might have a picture of this here. Washington State has just passed a bill that would take children away from their parents if the parents don't fully support the gender transition. This is Senator Marco Lilas. Sorry if I messed that name up. But anyway, he says, tonight we passed SB 5599 to ensure at-risk youth have access to shelter when seeking gender-affirming or reproductive care. Trans youth have been under nationwide attack, but Washington legislation continues to fight for trans rights, then gives a bunch of links and things. But this access to shelter means, for instance, if a child, a minor, comes over and says, hey, I need protection from people, aka my parents, and I need to transition and get hormone blockers and perhaps even surgery, they say, okay, and they don't have to give the child back to their parents. That is what this legislation says. Now, will this be held up? I don't know, but this is what we're talking about. This is where the cult, this religion, does want to say, hey, we know better than you. We know what your kids want, what they need, and we're going to follow this and basically fight you parents over it. Okay. That was pretty heavy. We'll go to a lighter subject now. How was that for a transition? We're going to talk about Bud Light. All right. So I know. So Dylan Mulvaney, I mean, man, I've talked about him a bunch. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this because you've probably heard about it all over the place. And there are a lot of people who have commented on it and shown clips of it. And I'm not going to. I'm not going to spend very much time on it. But this is Dylan Mulvaney, and he had this campaign with Bud Light where he talked about March Madness and that he didn't know anything about it because he was a ditzy girl. But then he got his face on the Bud Light can, and then the internets and conservatives went just nuts. There was a prominent musician who shot a bunch of not shot like drank, but shot with a weapon, a bunch of the cans in response. There was a whole bunch of responses, really. But here's where I want to go on this. And the reality is, as far as I can tell, there numbers have gone down. Their numbers have gone down a whole bunch. I was going to read through a bunch of the stats of the sales that have gone down, but I'm not actually going to do that. You can go and look that up. I mean, you can go check the numbers. I think this has been an effective boycott campaign, which has been to say, hey, Budweiser, like, we don't love this. A guy dressing up like a girl is not a great spokesperson for your brand, and we don't like that, and so you can go down that boycott road, and I think that's good. But I want to hit something else. I want to hit this from a different angle that I haven't heard a lot about, but I think is important from a Christian worldview. And this is what I want to say, and you can disagree, but this is the conclusion that I'm coming to. The more that I see this whole thing happening, this whole trans culture happening, I think what I figured out is. This is my thought on the whole deal, that the trans culture is aimed at women entirely. This whole trans culture is aimed at women. Now, I know what we're seeing is men dressing like women almost exclusively. There are some women who are going to the man side here, but mostly it is men trying to become women. And I think there's a reason for that. But let's look at a couple of things, right? You have men and women's sports, and when men go into women's sports, the women, they just keep playing. If you can't see, here's a picture. It is, I think it's either soccer or rugby. I don't even know, but it doesn't matter. Like, there are these women they look like women. And then there's this dude that just literally looks like a giant. I mean, he looks so big. And he is just annihilating. Like, one of the girls in front of this guy, this hulking monster of a dude, this trans person, it looks like he's going to literally run her over like a locomotive and just flatten her. Like, I don't know what's happening in this picture, but that's not a good representation of women's sports. There's women's beauty pageants. I brought you some of that the other day. I don't know if I have a picture of that. Yeah, I don't have a picture of that. It doesn't matter. You get the idea. There's men and women's beauty pageants. Oh, here's another sports one that I clipped. There was a man who won women's biking. There was a man weightlifter who won that. There's this man who is racing, like foot racing, and just crushing the women. I mean, like, on and on and on and on. This is just like, men keep competing and winning, and the women just keep being in the competitions and keep buying. Like, they're like this Dylan Mulvaney himself. I didn't even write it down because there are so many. There are a dozen plus women's brands that he's now the mascot for as a man, being a girl, being the mascot for a women's brand. Like it was like a dozen when I looked it up. I mean, there's so many women's brands that this man is the mascot for, and I guess women just keep buying this stuff. Like, I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, they shouldn't. But here's where I'm going with this. And this is my thought. And you can again disagree. But this is what I think is going on. I think women in general are agreeable. And I think they're more likely to go with the flow. They tend towards nurturing. They tend towards sticking together. I mean, the old, generalization is that they all go to the bathroom together. I mean, it's just what I've experienced, what I've seen. I think there's even, like, if you get into psychological things, which is not my forte for sure, is they just do things together. They participate in life more together, whereas men tend towards competition and just fighting. I mean, that's just bred into us. It is who we are. We are more combative. We are more, and I'm totally generalizing. There are examples on both sides for sure, but I think as a whole, in general, this is just kind of the way it is. And so we see tons of men in women's sports and other areas, and we see very few women in men's sports or men's areas. When was the last time you saw a woman really struggling to be a garbage man or really struggling to be a high voltage line worker? Like, I haven't seen any stories of that, or like Mike Rowe did this dirty job show. You don't have a lot of women lining up to do those jobs, but that's the thing, right? These men want to do the girly jobs, but I think this Budweiser example is an example that men won't stand for it. Men just won't stand for this ridiculousness when it comes into our arena. Now, I don't like Bud Light. at all. I can actually say I don't think I've ever even had a Bud Light at all ever, and I wouldn't anyway. But the boycott has just been so massive. It's been massive, and I think largely it's because they tried to insert this man pretending to be a girl into a men's area of this beer. Even one of the spokespeople, I think it was the vice president of marketing or something, of Bud Light, came on and said that it was too fratty, so they had to make it more inclusive, and that's why they did this ad campaign with Dylan Mulvaney. And men were like, no. So here's where I'm going. Right here's where I'm going with this. I don't get the thing about this whole deal that I have not understood is if you're a girl and you're competing in swimming, for instance, with Leah Thomas, right? Who's a man and who just dominated the swimming field in front of all these poor young girls who had no chance against him. Why did you swim? This is the part that has boggled my mind. I don't understand why, and I think that's part of it. I think what I've uncovered here, and again, I can be wrong, but this is what I think is that women want to be agreeable. They want to get along, but guys do not. They just don't. Guys will be like, no, I'm not doing that. And that's it. Like they'll just, you know a guy who's just like that. You're like, do this. And they go, no. And that's like the end of the conversation. It's like, well, okay, I guess you're not. That's how some guys just are. And women are like, oh, okay. And again, super generalization. You can throw things at me. That's fine. I'm just saying, I think that is one of the dynamics that's going on here. So here's my conclusion. And here's what I would like to call for the guys specifically. Guys, dads, husbands, I'm talking to you, and this is my challenge as I've been thinking through this. Again, you can be mad at me, fine, whatever, but I'm trying to get to the bottom of what in the world is going on with this trans phenomena and what can we do about it, especially as Christian men. I think men have not stood up enough for this. I think dads have not stood enough for this. I think husbands have not stood up enough for this. And I think we need to. So men, please stand up for the women. I know you're called the toxic patriarchy and toxic masculinity and all that garbage. And women say they don't want anything from you and they don't need anything from you and they can do everything for themselves. But I don't care. This is a fight you should get in. Dads, stop letting your daughters compete against these men. Stop it. Just stop it. Say, no, you're not doing this, and make a fuss about it. I'm not saying violence. Please hear me. Like, we need to be peaceable, but we need to be bold and say, no, we're not doing this. My 16-year-old daughter is not competing against a man in a foot race or in a swimming race or in tennis or whatever. Like, no, we're not doing this. Dads, you need to step out there and say, no, this is not happening and we're not doing this. And husbands, stop letting your wives buy all these companies' goods that don't care about you and they are making their mascots, these men dressed as women. Just stop. Say, no, why would you spend our money on that? Don't spend the money on that. Like, they don't like you. They don't respect you as a woman. Like, let's put our business somewhere else. All of that to say, I think it's time to stand up. I think it's time to speak truth boldly and act rightly. This is the time. Like, just stop this madness. I'm going to say you're going to get called names for this. It's going to happen. But you have to have the boldness to say, no, we're going to do the right thing here. We're going to not go into this delusion, and we're going to say, let's do the right thing here. And yeah, I'll say one more thing. I was even reading earlier today that the loving thing is just to love your friend, your neighbor, whatever, in whatever sexual identity they choose. I just don't agree with that. I don't think that's biblical. I don't think it's biblical to love someone and lie to them. Like, if you love them, you won't lie to them. If you love them, you won't say, well, what you're doing is not beneficial. Like, if you love them, you have to say, this is not good for you. It's not good for others. Like, we have to do the right thing and start saying true things and acting with grace and truth and actual love that is difficult love, but important to do as well. So I think it's time for us to act rightly. And I just encourage you dads, you husbands out there to not be passive, but to be proactive and be present in some of these issues, because if we, the Christian fathers, Christian husbands, don't start acting in this, the culture, the community is just lost. It's time. All right. So a little bit more here. Speaking of acting, and this is just a story that I came across that I thought was weird. But I think it's important for us to understand from a Christian perspective, from a cultural perspective. I think there's a worldview implication here that is actually, hopefully, you're going to agree that this is a really good point. So, I have been, and I may or may not have said this out loud to you all before, but I've been fairly skeptical of artificial intelligence, AI. I don't want them to have all my information. I watched too many dystopian movies and read too many dystopian books to think that basically every time when a robot is involved, it rises up and wants to kill you. Anyway, that aside, AI is here, and it is, I think, here to stay, and it is getting more and more sophisticated as things go on. So what I came across is this Kuwaiti news from the BBC. This is reported from the BBC, so it's Kuwaiti news, but read by an AI person. This is a virtual news presenter using artificial intelligence. So I'm going to play this for you. It is in Arabic, I believe, so I'm going to play it and kind of narrate it because I don't speak Arabic, and you probably don't either. So we're just going to play this and then talk about it for a second. So let's see how this works. Okay, so this is Feda, and she made her debut on Twitter for the Kuwaiti news, and she is an image of a woman. She's got light hair, black jacket, white t-shirt, and she says this in Arabic. So this is the English translation. I'm Feda, the first presenter in Kuwait who works with artificial intelligence at Kuwaiti News. What kind of news do you prefer? Let's hear your opinions. And this was generated in Arabic. And this apparently is just a computer generated image. It's not an actual person, though. I mean, it kind of looks like an actual person. I'm just saying. And Feda is apparently an old Kuwaiti name that refers to silver, which apparently we imagine robots to be silver and metallic. So again, I just have visions of Terminator, but that's fine. We'll move on from that. And here's where I want to go with this. I think that AI news is the future. And I didn't want to say this. I would like to say the opposite. I would like to say you'd rather hear the news from me. You'd rather hear the news from an actual human with actual emotions. But I think AI news is the future. I think a lot of AI things are the future. And here is the reason, though I'm not happy with it, but this is the reason. AI will put things together faster and more accurately than you can or I can really ever. That's going to be the reality. AI is going to be able to get the information assembled into a package that makes sense faster than I can, faster than you can. That is just what is going to happen. But here's the thing that, again, I haven't heard a lot of people talking about in this whole AI deal. I saw Elon weighed in about it. I saw some other people talking about it, and we may have some more conversations about that in the future, depending on how things go. But I think one piece of this that is important for us to understand from a Christian perspective is AI shows us what it means to be human. And here's what I mean by that. We as humans have limits. We cannot do everything. That's part of who we are, because God is omnipotent, all-powerful, and omnipresent in all places at once. God has all of these extra supernatural things, and we don't. We're just who we are. We have limited information. We have limited perception. We have limited senses. We have just a lot of limits on who we are. But if you go beyond those limits, you lose what makes you human. You cease to be fully human. This whole progressive liberalism, even the trans stuff, the LGBT stuff that we talked about earlier, it's all designed to go past your humanity. It's designed to make you more than you were before. But when you break through these limitations, these ideas of humanity, you just remove it. You remove your humanity. It doesn't make you more than, it doesn't make you superhuman. It just makes you less human. Identity, and this is a problem that we have, we put up these ideas that our identity comes from other things. A lot of times it's something that you do. We say identity is what you do, who you are, those types of things. So your identity is a swimmer. Your identity is a newscaster. Your identity is a lawyer. It's what you do that makes you who you are. But that, first of all, that isn't actually true. But the problem here that we get illustrated by AI is this artificial intelligence will do it better. It'll do it better than you. And we're coming quickly to a place where it will, if you're an artist even, because arts used to be this place where, well, at least as an artist, you could do things that AI never could do. And that may still be true, but now we're seeing in just a few months' time, it going from weird like hands and feet coming out of your head and just weird art to it being really good art. And it's only going to get better, and it's going to get better a lot faster. AI is going to do what you do better and probably faster. So back to identity, which is a huge part of this LGBT revolution, the trans revolution. It must be grounded in who you are in God. Identity just comes from God. If it comes from anything else, you are bound for despair, for anxiety, for depression, because you will try to create your identity out of something that just isn't enough. It will never be enough. Identity must come from God. Martin Lloyd-Jones was talking about Ephesians 1 and God's purpose. And in those sermons, he repeatedly said this phrase: our greatest need is to become who we already are in Christ. That's what he kept saying over and over again. Our greatest need is to become who we already are in Christ. We know everyone who has come from God and is born of God, right, baptized into God's kingdom, does not keep on sinning, but he who was born of God protects him, and the evil one doesn't touch him. We know that we are from God, and the whole world tells us lies. That's what we've looked at today. Just lots and lots and lots of lies. But Jesus has come and he's given us understanding so that we may know him who is true, and we who are in Jesus who is true, he is the true God and eternal life. This is 1 John 5:18-20. So in other words, we understand that we come from God. We understand that when we place our identity in God, we have that Paul says, put on the righteousness of Christ, almost like clothing, where you put on this righteousness. You become the image of God that you are meant to be by connecting with God through his son, Jesus Christ. We get understanding through that. We get truth from that. We get identity from that. And when we try to get this identity from something else, we're just going to end up being sad and broken and without hope. But the good news is in Christ. Artificial intelligence is here. It's going to grow more. It's going to become more prevalent in culture. But we are made in the image of God, the imago Dei. And we and you are infinitely more valuable than any computer. So that's good news. It's good news when you follow after Jesus with your heart and soul and mind and strength, and you love God with everything that you have and love your neighbor as yourself. I hope that you can do more and more of that as we see the day approaching, and I hope that you follow Jesus. I hope that you will do all of this in the grace and truth that we talked about earlier, because you're going to need more and more of that. You're going to have to find that courage from something outside of yourself. And Jesus says, take heart, have courage. I have overcome the world. For Church Public, I'm Matt Odegaard. And as always, keep the faith.